Jaya Radha Madhava Punya Vihari.
Hare Krishna, welcome dear devotees back to Books Are the Basis, our series with interviews, talking to different senior devotees about the importance of reading Srila Prabhupada's books. And today we have with us His Grace Basu Ghosh Prabhu. Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's our great honor and pleasure to have you with us. Basu Ghosh Prabhu, joined ISKCON in Chicago when he was still quite young, in the age of 17, in February 1973 in Chicago, and always felt a strong attraction towards India, Indian culture and language. Then came to India a year later in the age of 18, and basically spent his whole life in India. Also, of course, he got initiated by Srila Prabhupada and serves as the temple president of ISKCON Baroda, and is also a member of the Indian Bureau, the Indian Leadership Board, and has a lot of experience in Krishna consciousness. And we are very happy to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining. Hare Krishna.
Thank you for having me.
It's quite impressive. In a very young age, you went to India and somehow, spent your whole life there. So I'd like to talk about that, but let's start with our first question in regards to what was your first contact with Srila Prabhupada's books? We mentioned you joined quite early. Do you remember, how did you join, or what was the first book that you received, and how did it change your life?
Before I joined, I got back to Godhead magazine twice.
Okay, yeah, that was the days.
I distinctly remember this. Once, for those who know Chicago, the town, the city, there's a big street in the downtown area, which is also called the Loop, because there's a elevated train that loops around the downtown area. So they call it the Loop.
Okay.
And the biggest street there, that it was a shopping area in the past. It was called State Street. And this was before the era of malls in the West. There's some malls in India now, but it's not like the West. It is and it isn't. There are some malls here that are like the West also. But anyway, that State Street was a famous shopping place, huge department stores. And I was very young, 16. That's when I got it back to Godhead from a lady who was distributing that. I remember this. Then about, I guess it was more than a year later, I got it back to Godhead on the campus of the University of Colorado in Boulder, Colorado, which is not, it's like a suburb of Denver now. Denver has become so big, it used to be a separate town. It's still separate, but it's very close, due to urban expansion. So I read that. The first magazine I hardly read. And the second magazine I read kind of intensely. And circumstances were that I returned to Chicago after getting that magazine. And a friend had the book Easy Journey to Other Planets. So I took that from my friend and I read that cover to cover. Then I started visiting the temple with the excuse to buy incense. I could, tell you many other things, but obviously this was my link to ISKCON. I used to come to the temple. I got some more back to Godheads. And it was December 1972 that a godbrother who's still very active and who lives in the San Francisco Bay Area convinced me to shell out $5 and buy Bhagavad Gita as it is. So at the time I had already graduated high school and I was supposed to go to the university, and I didn't go, ended up joining the temple. Wow. But I read that intensely. It was a holiday period, this Christmas vacation, 72. And shortly thereafter, I started attending the Gita class in the temple in the evenings. And that was for 3 weeks. And every day they would read one chapter in English and then have a lecture on one verse. That was the system. And then I moved in and never left. So I read all the books after I joined mostly.
So easy journey to other planets, and then later on Bhagavad Gita.
Right.
Do you still remember some passages or something which really kind of touched you or convinced you?
What struck me, of course, surrender to Krishna and all that, but what touched me is that it's a history of the world, the factual history that we were never taught in school. In my mind, in those days and even in these days, Indian civilization seemed to be the oldest in the world.
Yeah.
So that I felt was a fact, and that's a conviction I have.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, it's, you never stop learning. You never stop really being a student. The more you know, the more you come to know how little you know. As the saying, there was an elderly man who's no more, and after he retired, he did a bachelor's degree in Sanskrit and other languages. He was a bank manager, but he was from a Brahmin family, so he had those Brahminical sanskaras. So yeah, we're still learning. We haven't stopped learning, and there's a lot. I mean, I can't say I've touched the tip of the iceberg, as the saying goes.
Mm-hmm. But it's interesting because you lived for 1 year in the Chicago temple, and then afterwards you decided to go to India. Had you met? Did you met Prabhupada in Chicago, or you met him first time in India?
The story is that during 1973, Prabhupada came to New York, went to Dallas, and then Los Angeles. He didn't come to the Midwest of Chicago. He went to Dallas. So I was a young new devotee. Dallas is quite far from Chicago. So is New York. Nobody went from our temple. We had a lot of devotees during 1973 come through. And during that 1 year, we went to Milwaukee for book distribution. Before that, we went to Detroit Rath Yatra. And then Milwaukee, we did 10 days of book distribution in the Summer Fest, which that was the first year, and it still goes on in Milwaukee on the lakefront. And we would go out from noon till midnight, 12 hours of book distribution. We would take prasad. We stayed in the home of one Indian man who was initiated devotee, apparently, as I recall. Later on, I saw him at the opening of Krishna Balaram Temple, and that was the last time. It's, 47 years ago. And then we went to New Vrindavan for Janmashtami.
Okay.
And we didn't even take a bath. We slept on the hill. And then we slept outside and we left. There was no facility. Yeah. It was really roughing it. So Prabhupada didn't come to New Vrindavan in 73. He had come in 72, Janmashtami. And maybe he came back in 74 to New Vrindavan. But anyway, we weren't taken. Our temple president in December 73 flew to Los Angeles when Prabhupada was there, as I recall. How I came to India was Jasumati Nandan Prabhu, who left his body in October of 2020, who was sitting in front of me in the picture. When I joined, he was in the temple, sitting in front of me in the picture in the background.
All right, we see you there. You have glasses and you look a little bit upwards like this.
Right, yeah, exactly. And then in front of me, that Indian devotee is Jasumati Nandan Prabhu.
Okay.
So he was in Chicago temple. And when I joined in February, he left after 2 or 3 months. And he came back in December. And when he came back, he said, "Do you want to come to India?" And I said, "Sure." Oh. And so he cut the internal red tape, because I was very surrendered. You know how it is in ISKCON. You surrender to the temple authorities.
They don't like if you go to India. Usually,
it's the story is a very funny story. The president and the vice president sent me 2 weeks before they left. they didn't think of saying, here's an 18-year-old. They weren't much older, right? They were 23 or 24. So I went alone to India. They didn't say, come with us. So such was life, in those days. And when I came, I had the ticket all the way to Calcutta, but I, got down at Bombay. There was a separate ticket, Bombay, Calcutta, and back, and then back to New York. That was taken away by the then temple commander in Juhu. I won't mention his name. I lost. I came into Bombay, and Bombay devotees thought I was joining ISKCON in Bombay. As things turned out, Prabhupada came the next day.
Oh, wow.
When I arrived, the late Sridhar Swami was a brahmachari, came and picked me up at the airport after I called the temple with a few paisa. It was 30 paisa for a phone call. And somehow a devotee who's still around in England, he picked up the phone, and sure enough, the late Sridhar Swami came and picked me up in the Jeep. In India, in ISKCON, there were just 2 Jeeps at that time. There was no even ambassador car. One Jeep was in Bombay, and the other Jeep, I think, was traveling. It was in Mayapur or something. Anyway, we used to move around in auto rickshaws or bicycle rickshaws or buses. Those days were, anyway, there's a lot of stuff to talk about like that. Anyway, Prabhupada came the next day, stayed for 10 days. I went to Mayapur from Bombay in a train. Prabhupada was in Mayapur. We went to Vrindavan for the festival. Mayapur, 400 devotees came. That was the first really big Mayapur festival. There was one a year earlier, but it wasn't attended by many, but 400 from all over the world came in 74. And then we went to Vrindavan. But it was in Mayapur that I officially joined Achyutananda, then Swami. He was a Swami at that time. And with him, with his group, we went to Vrindavan and then back to Bombay and then Hyderabad. And Prabhupada came to all those places. And then Tirupati, we went in a van. Prabhupada flew, and we were with Prabhupada in Tirupati for 3 days. Hyderabad was 5 days. Public lectures of Prabhupada.
So in this way,
74, 75, and 76, Prabhupada had public lectures in Hyderabad.
So in this way, you got a lot of association with Prabhupada. And then finally, you were based in Hyderabad also for some time.
Yeah, well, Achyutananda was based in Hyderabad, and I reached in April, but we didn't start the traveling party until September. So I was in Hyderabad that time. Then we traveled with Achyutananda through even January. And January 75, then I was in Hyderabad managing 2 train cars to bring 150 devotees from Mayapur to Hyderabad, and then take them to Vrindavan for the temple opening, the Mathura, Hyderabad to Mathura. And then I left the Achyutananda party, and I became a part of Hyderabad. And that went on till after Prabhupada disappeared a year later. In 79, February, March, I came to Mayapur, and then Jasomati Nandan Prabhu, I knew him. He was the one who was really responsible for me coming to India within ISKCON. So I joined him in Ahmedabad in 79 March and stayed in Gujarat for 42 years.
Wow. And yeah, you speak fluently Gujarati and Hindi, and also you study Sanskrit.
Hindi, yeah, Gujarati is conversational, but I didn't really study, and so it's kind of broken. I can get by, but everyone speaks Hindi. Everyone means in urban Gujarat, everyone means mostly everybody speaks Hindi. It's not a lot different. There's some intonations, and it's a different language, no doubt. So I get by in that. when I need to, but usually we speak in Hindi over here. And then Sanskrit conversational, I picked up, and I'm still a conversationalist. That doesn't mean I know the whole language. I mean, it's a complicated language compared to modern languages. And there are many more words in Sanskrit. There's a movement, to revive it as a spoken language in India.
Yeah.
And that movement is on the periphery of society. It's not a mass movement.
Yeah.
There are those who are interested, and then they pick it up. And then there are the scholars, the traditional students of Sanskrit literature, which is all over India. It was Brahmins. There's actually traditional studies, and then there's the modern university type of studies.
Okay.
And the traditional studies are, you memorize. For example, the Nyaya, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was Nimai Pandit. He was a Nyayayika, a student of Nyaya philosophy. So I visited one Brahmin who was teaching this in Pune. He left Pune now, he's gone to a village in Goa, his native village. But anybody could study regardless of caste. There were two conditions. You had to know Sanskrit, and you had to study 23 commentaries of the Nyaya Sutras and memorize them.
Oh, wow.
This was the type of study of Nyaya. We visited in Andhra Pradesh, this has got to be 20 years ago, a chartered accountant. In England, it came from England. In the United States, it's called certified public accountant. In India and England, chartered accountant. So this man pointed to his grandfather's picture on the wall, and he said that my grandfather was a Tarka Kesari. Kesari means lion, and Tarka is, logic, Nyaya Shastras. And he studied in Navadvip. So Navadvip was a center of Nyaya studies for centuries, even after Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, but now nothing. It's been wiped out. Anyway, that's another issue.
Okay, great to hear a bit about your background and your stay in India. Now, the reading of Srila Prabhupada's books, just in general, what is the benefit of reading Prabhupada's book regularly? What would you say to the devotees? Why should we read on a regular basis?
Okay. Well, we're supposed to know the philosophy. I mean, Prabhupada had said that he stressed book distribution, but he said you have to know what's in the books. Yeah, I'm sorry for that noise. You have to know what's in the books. So how can you know unless you read them? How can you know what's in the books unless you read the books? Recently, I conducted a Bhakti Shastri seminar for Bhakti Vedanta Manor congregational devotees. And, going through those purports after a long time, wow, Prabhupada presented a clear ideology. And unless you go over that, review it again and again, it's easy to get misguided. I don't know how much I should talk, but I mean, let's put it like this. Devotees, some section of devotees, I mean, there's this conversation. I was just reading Prabhupada in 1977 with Satsvarup Maharaj and Hari Chaudhary about Varnashram, and both of them are arguing with Prabhupada and saying that, well, Harinam is all we need to do is chant. We don't need Varnashram. And Prabhupada is saying, no, it's not so easy. If you think that you can chant like Haridas Thakur, you'll become a Sahajiya. So a Sahajiya is someone who takes things very cheaply. And Prabhupada said, he mentioned the name of one of his disciples. He said he was a sannyasi, but he had 6 dozen women, something like that. And I could get you the quote. This is a true story. And the name has been removed from the conversation, because nobody wants to insult That sannyasi left his body. Prabhupada he came crying to Prabhupada towards the end of Prabhupada's life and apologizing. Prabhupada said, be a householder. Be a householder in our movement. Don't leave the movement. So, it's very easy to, become lax about the teachings or to adopt Sahajiya type of outlook. In Bengal, there's different sects of Gaudiya Sahajiyas, which were mentioned by Prabhupada and Bhakti Siddhanta, and then a late godbrother, Suhotra Swami, had written a book about these Upasampradayas in Bengal. And, they make a show of devotion, but they don't follow any principles, so that's the problem. So, it's easy to get deviated from the philosophy. It's easy to get, can I tell a funny story?
Sure.
I entered Grihastha Ashram in November 1984. And the devotee who came and did my, he did the rituals for the wedding. He's a godbrother. I won't mention his name, but that godbrother told me there's an Ashwamedha Yagna going on in Ahmedabad. I was in Ahmedabad at the time when I entered Grihastha Ashram. So together we went there. And this was being organized by one of the Vallabh Sampradaya Goswamis. I don't know if you understand what that means. But the Vallabh Sampradaya is a hereditary title of Goswami. The son of the Goswami becomes a Goswami. So one of their devotees of Krishna, Vallabh Sampradaya, is Krishna Bhakti Sampradaya. But to be qualified to be a Goswami is by birth. So that we don't agree with.
Yeah.
Anyway, he arranged this big yagna and called a huge group of Brahmins from South India to perform the rituals. Anyway, what they do, instead of actually sacrificing animals, which is illegal apparently, but goes on in villages, not in big cities. So they make an animal out of chapati dough. They make a dough and put it into the shape of the animal. It's called Pishta Pashu. Pishta means flower in Sanskrit.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, we went to meet the head priest, the main Purohit, Tatacharya. So you may not have heard this title. Tata means grandfather. Acharya means, learned Brahmin. And he was Ramanuja Brahmin with a big Ramanuja tilak. And when we talked to him, it turned out that he was a Mayavadi. He was a follower of Advaita. Maybe not formally, but informally, that was his outlook. We both of us were flabbergasted, my godbrother and myself. How could this with the Vaishnav tilak? So reading Prabhupada's books means to accept what Prabhupada taught. And Prabhupada taught that the basis of Krishna consciousness is the Vedas and Vedic literature. And his commentary is like that, to instill faith in Vedic literature. That's in the introduction to the Ishopanishad. I could read that since it's one of Prabhupada's books, and I just had it open. Can I read? Do you mind?
Yeah, sure. You can read the passage. Yeah.
It says here, Introduction, Teachings of the Vedas. No, I'm just going to read 2 sentences. Mm-hmm. Delivered as a lecture by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada on October 6th at Conway Hall, London, England. Ladies and gentlemen, today's subject matter is the teachings of the Vedas. What are the Vedas? ? The Sanskrit verbal root of Veda can be interpreted variously, but the purport is finally one. Veda means knowledge. Any knowledge you accept is Veda, for the teachings of the Vedas are the original knowledge. you know, the Ishopanishad is it's from the Shukla Yajurveda Samhita, whereas the Upanishads are actually another part of the Vedas. There's Samhita, Brahmana, Aranyaka, and Upanishads. Ishopanishad is found in the Samhita, not among the Upanishads, but it's called Ishopanishad. Keep the door closed. Sorry, little interruption there, some noise.
So basically, probably you're emphasizing that the importance of reading Prabhupada's books has to do with actually understanding Prabhupada's teachings properly, so that we're not getting deviated, and that we stick to what Prabhupada originally taught us, right?
Absolutely. Of course. Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Unfortunately, this is what we have an apprehension that, you know, devotees, this happened during the time of Prabhupada. You know, there was this Gopi Baba club, you might have heard of that, where everyone thought that they were suddenly gopis. There was a god brother, he's still alive, and he lives the life of a hermit in the United States, cut off from civilization. He has a farm in the middle of in the Rocket Mountain area. And when I first joined, he told us, I've heard Krishna's flute and I've heard the gopis, something like that. So, I mean, we knew it was Sahajiya, it was nonsense, you know. So, you know, Prabhupada has said this again and again, it's not so cheap. But, you know, there's this tendency to, you know, want to jump and, you know, be with Krishna immediately. In Hyderabad in 1975, this picture that's behind me is 76. In 75, Prabhupada was lecturing to 10,000 people. And one thing I remember from that lecture series was there was a questions and answers that was conducted by Achyutananda, then Swami. And one man said, you know, Krishna came in my house and he helped my mother and this thing and that thing. And Prabhupada's reply was, well, if Krishna came, why is your family involved? You know, that's what Prabhupada said. You know, why should Krishna get involved in the family affairs? Well, why that man specifically? Then he would be involved in everybody's family affairs. He didn't say that, but you know, it's taken cheaply. You know, Bhagavatam is recited all over India. They call it the Bhagavat Sapta, right? 7 days of recitation. And I don't know, Prabhupada wanted a more intense study of the Bhagavatam. If you really study it, now, there's some devotees saying we're not Vedic. You might have heard this. Then why are we building an 800 crore, you know, temple of the Vedic planetarium in Mayapur? Maybe there's a mistake being made. And then there are devotees, I won't mention their names, who say that we're not following Varnashram. Varnashram is the caste system. I don't want to hear about Varnashram. I heard this from an ISKCON leader 7-8 years back in Juhu, in Bombay. But if you read the purports, for example, 9th canto, 10th chapter, 50 and 51, Prabhupada talks about Lord Ramachandra and Ram Rajya, the kingdom of Rama. And then everyone must follow Varnashram. And these were his last purports. The end of the ninth canto and the 10th canto up to chapter 13. Prabhupada stressed Varnashram. And if we deny that, how are we following Prabhupada? It's sad. I don't know what I should say. If you read Prabhupada's books, and his endorsement of Varnashram in the purports, you know, it leaves no doubt in the mind that he wanted us ISKCON society, not human society outside of it. ISKCON, but his followers, he instructed them in the purports very clearly. It's not just the one or two purports. There's a number of the seventh canto. There's a whole, chapter about Varnashram. So it's a theme that runs through his teachings. And if his own followers repudiate that, are they his followers? I don't think so.
Yeah, of course in ISKCON we have this sometimes challenges that devotees, they discuss with each other. Prabhupada said, and there is a whole discussion. I guess we all agree that we need to understand a complete picture of Prabhupada's teachings. And certainly when we study Prabhupada's books, that will help us understand the complete picture. We also have one question here, which we say that how would be ISKCON different if actually devotees would read Srila Prabhupada's books regularly? Like some devotees say, well, it would maybe create more division, but others say, well, it would help to get a deeper understanding. What would you?
All the temples have Bhagavatam class. See, can I say one thing? Prabhupada on occasion said, Jesus is our guru, right? He was surrounded by Christians. In Australia, when he went, particularly Christianity was very strong. Devotees had been arrested on the streets for doing kirtan in the very early 1970s. Later on, it became a little liberal, and now it's, totally liberal. But Prabhupada had to deal with, Christianity in the West. But here's the thing. His books don't include the Bible. They don't include the teachings of anyone from Christianity. Only the Gita, the Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, and he wanted to translate Ramayana, and he endorses Vedic literature. Now, I asked Prabhupada in Vrindavan in 75 on a morning walk, September 75, is it better to worship the one God of the Western religions or to worship the demigods? And so he said, it's better to worship the demigods, because by following the Vedic system, you get gradual elevation. And then he said, these religions, the Western religions, are the religions of the meat eaters. So although he might have said Jesus is our guru or Muhammad is our guru, to placate the time and circumstances, Samadama Danda Bed, Chanakya Niti, one of them is appeasement. But internally, he propagated the Vedic system. Not internally in the purports. You read the purports. Now, there's one purport that I'm remembering on a daily basis. That's Bhagavatam 3:24-40. Kardama Muni is about to leave and become a sannyasi, not formally, but a renunciate.
Yeah.
And his wife is Devahuti. So he entrusts Devahuti to Kapila, who's an incarnation. And in the purport of number 40, right, 3:24-40, quote unquote, so-called spiritual societies concocted in modern times give sannyas even to women when there is no sanction in Vedic literature. Now, from this purport, it's very clear that the basis of authority for Varnashram, sannyas is part of Varnashram, right? The 4 Varnas and the 4 ashramas. And the basis is sanction in Vedic literature. Prabhupada was propagating Vedic literature. He didn't translate it all. And the Bhagavatam, we say, is the ripened fruit, right? Nigama kalpa taruhu galitam phalam. The ripened fruit of the Nigama means Vedas. I made a comment on Facebook. Those who say we're not Vedic should read a particular verse and Prabhupada's purport. I'm forgetting now which is the verse, So one godbrother who was actually initiated with me, so if you look up my initiation letter, you'll see his name there. He's older than I am in age. He's not a young man, he's in his 70s. And he quoted from Gita, Vedavada Rataf Partha. One should not be enamored by the flowery words of the Vedas. But if you just take that one verse, do you reject all the Vedas? But the first verse of the Bhagavatam, Nigama Kalpa Taruhu, the wish-fulfilling tree of the Vedas. Galitam Phalam, the ripened fruit is the Bhagavatam. But, you don't get that unless you have the Vedas. So how can you say we're not Vedic? But they're not reading the totality of Prabhupada's purports. You see, Prabhupada had egalitarian statements, mostly in letters, not so much in the purports. Everything is Vedic. The purports should really be considered the topmost teachings of Prabhupada. The letters are sometimes the philosophy, and sometimes it's and conversations are time and circumstance.
Yeah.
Institutional policy for ISKCON wasn't set down in conversations. It's in the purports. Prabhupada gave great thought to the purports and presented his ideology in the purports. So to be true to that ideology, we have to study those purports. And we shouldn't deviate from them. Now, we may be weak. Like I'm a householder. I'm not a renunciate, so I'm weak. Householders are weak. They're attached to their wife and children. Maybe some are detached, But that is one thing, and the ideals that Prabhupada taught is another thing. There's a practical reality. A sannyasi fell down with multiple women, and Prabhupada told him to remain in ISKCON, but be a householder. Have one wife. Actually, Prabhupada was in favor of polygamy. He's written that in the purports. But it's illegal, so, you can't do it.
Yeah.
But Vedic concept is like that. So he supported these Vedic concepts. Krishna's father, Vasudeva, had 9 wives. Krishna had 16,108. But Krishna didn't have the most. Who had the most? Chitraketu. This is in the Bhagavatam. 10 million wives. I didn't write the Bhagavatam, and Prabhupada propagated the Bhagavatam. And we believe it was possible because people lived in the Satya Yuga for 100,000 years. Otherwise, how can you enjoy with 10 million wives and then not have a child? That's the Bhagavatam. So, it's intrinsic on us to read the purports, to read the books and know what's inside these books. And it's only a part of Vedic knowledge. There's another quote, I just posted it on Facebook also, where Prabhupada, we're not supposed to read the commentary. We heard that we shouldn't read the commentaries of the previous acharyas. And Prabhupada said, I never said that. You should, you must read them. So, there's a lot of things. What can I say? People, one senior leader just wrote a letter. Well, I think Prabhupada would have done something like this. I'm not getting into what that is. But this is what happens, that Prabhupada's disciples interpret and interpolate what he clearly said and change it. Wrong. Shouldn't happen. We should accept. That's why Bhagavad Gita as it is. Don't say that, what Prabhupada's big criticism was Dr. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, who was the vice president of India in the 1950s. And he wrote a commentary on Gita, and he wrote in Sarva Dharman Parityaja, it is not to Krishna that we have to surrender, but to the unborn within Krishna, his own Mayavadi interpretation. Therefore, Prabhupada had Bhagavad Gita as it is. That you, Mam Ekam Sharanam Vraja, surrender. Ekam is me alone, one. Surrender to me. Krishna could have told Arjuna, surrender to the unborn within me. He didn't. He said, surrender to me. So, of course, there's a difference between Vaishnavism and the Advaita of Adi Shankara. And Buddhism is atheism. At least Adi Shankara, they believe in the Vedas. But the Buddhists reject the Vedas. And there are many purports where Prabhupada, in Chaitanya Charitamrita and in other places, where, Buddhism is totally rejected. Advaitavad is rejected. It's called covered Buddhism. But the great quality was, the mission of Adi Shankara as an incarnation of Shiva was to reestablish the authority of the Vedas. We believe that. Prabhupada wrote that.
Yeah, thank you very much for highlighting this point that, with studying Srila Prabhupada's books deeply, we understand how Vedic culture was, is such an important aspect of Prabhupada's teachings. You're also a leader. You're a temple president, and you're also a member of the Indian Bureau. So usually managers are quite busy. What would be your advice to managers in regards to reading Srila Prabhupada's books? Because often we hear, "Oh, Prabhu, I don't have time. I'm too busy." But at the same time, what we just heard from you, reading is very essential. So, what would be your message to leaders about reading Prabhupada's books?
Well, what we do here, what I do, is every day after Mangalarati, we read 10 verses of Gita, and with the translation.
Mm-hmm.
We do it in Hindi here, which is the language of communication. And then I had read the whole Bhagavatam like that, 10 verses, without the purports, but just the verses. Same with the Gita. Mm. So it becomes a daily exercise. And otherwise, during the day, we have a Bhagavatam class. There's no Gita class here. There are evening classes on the weekends. Mm-hmm. Some week there are these Gita learning course and spiritual journey or whatever they call it. The youth outreach, congregational outreach. But try to familiarize yourself. You can read the whole Nectar of Devotion, etc., etc. You just give a certain amount of time every day. It doesn't. We finished this Gita, and now we're reading Valmiki Ramayana and Shikshastakam in 20 minutes. So if you can invest 20 minutes, then you go over the Gita again and again and again. We just started it again.
So you're reading just after the Mangalarati, before everyone starts his japa? You're reading together?
No, after Mangal Arati, after Tulasi Arati.
Yeah.
After the Tulasi Arati, then we read 10 verses of Gita. Now it's Valmiki Ramayana. In the past, we had Bhagavatam. So it could be Nectar of Devotion, could be Chaitanya Charitamrita. 10 verses. So
many temples, they do read something from Nectar of Devotion, but you made it a point to actually read together certain shlokas. So, and in this way, actually, you make sure that all the devotees, they do regularly.
What we do is I do this responsive reading. I read and then they repeat.
Okay.
Verses, 10 verses, and then I read the translation.
Okay.
But for the Valmiki Ramayana or the Bhagavatam, I would just read. Yeah. They don't read. It's not responsive. Shikshastakam is I do responsive Shikshastakam. Whereas in many temples, they sing. We don't sing. We do the Stotrapat type of recitation. But responsive. So I say and you hear it twice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, memorizing all of that, Gita, those devotees that did that would read 1 chapter a day. So that's how you keep all the verses. But, it's tough. I didn't do it. So that's maybe a lacuna on my part. I really wish I memorized all the 700 verses. And there were people that memorized the whole Mahabharata and the whole Bhagavatam.
Yeah.
So, the Prabhupada made the comment that people are not so intelligent. And the Bhagavatam says that, right? Prayenal Payusha Sabhya Kalo Asmin Yuge Janaha. The people of this age, Manda, dull-headed. Sumanda, very dull-headed. Manda Matayaha, their heads are dull. Manda Bhagya, they're unfortunate, and Upadrubaha, they're disturbed. So because of all of this, you don't find those Pandits who memorized Vedic literatures. They existed here. Some of them are still there. It's getting rarer.
But that's a wonderful initiative that you make sure that you read together with the devotees. So basically, your advice to leaders would be to make sure to have some kind of program where devotees study together. And in this way, just make sure that the daily reading is part of the...
It's probably a weakness on our part that we don't have more classes during the day. But, you know, everyone has some engagement and gets involved in that. It used to be fundraising. Now fundraising has become a specialty, you know. So there are others, youth preachers, they do their youth preaching, and they're the ones that do online classes now. So it's all lectures from the purports of Prabhupada's books in ISKCON, supposed to be.
Now, sometimes devotees, they struggle with finding time, finding taste in reading. Obviously, when we actually read, we develop a taste and we want to read more and more. But sometimes it's difficult to reach that point or that taste. What would you advise devotees how we can develop such a taste in reading and really become more eager to associate with Prabhupada through his books?
You have to have that conviction, you know, that we're getting the correct Siddhanta from Prabhupada. And the previous acharyas. Why not? Like one devotee, a very, very senior devotee who joined, he's quite
6
elderly.
o'clock.
He's quite old, and he joined in 1967 or 68. He's been corresponding with me. And he asked a funny question, you know, why are you, these other sampradayas, he said, they're not going to last in Kali Yuga, only Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the Golden Age. So I cut and paste a quote from a Prameya Ratnavali of Baladev Vidyabhushan, where he quotes, I mean, Prabhupada dedicates his Gita to Baladev, and Baladev quotes Padma Purana. And in the Padma Purana, it says that there are 4 Vaishnava Sampradayas in Kali Yuga. So, you know, to say that there's only Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and the Golden Age, and it's a kind of fanaticism. And, you know, it's easy to become a fanatic. What can I say? Prabhupada said we're not fanatics. We're not utopian. You can't demand perfection. But to change what Prabhupada taught is a great offense in my mind. It's a great offense. And that's happening, unfortunately. Well, history repeats itself. Read Prabhupada's purport to Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Leela, chapter 12, text number 8, about the split of the Gaudiya Math. There were 2 groups of God brothers.
Right.
So Prabhupada, that the one group of God brothers he never associated with at all his whole life. And he wrote in that purport that one group created a concoction. And so, you know, the other God brothers who he talked about who were envious were the ones he associated with. The other ones don't even come into the picture. Those envious God brothers, for example, one of them, I'll mention his name, I never met him, was Bhakti Vilas Tirtha. And he passed away at this time. You see this picture around, you know, behind me, 1976. It was Jayapataka Maharaj who came to Hyderabad. He's not in these pictures for whatever reason, but he gave this news to Prabhupada. Now, I wasn't sitting there, but I heard the story secondhand at that time. That Bhaktivilas Tirtha, he was in the hospital for months and all kinds of tubes in him, and he suffered greatly in the end. And Jayapataka Maharaj asked Prabhupada, where did he go? And Prabhupada said he went back home, back to Godhead. And then Jayapataka Maharaj said, but Prabhupada, he was envious of you. And Prabhupada said, that wasn't so important. And there's a purport. Can I read that purport? Give me a moment.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, I've got it right here. So it's from the 4th canto, chapter 28, text number 31. And Prabhupada writes in the purport, the disciples of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj are all God brothers. And although there are some differences of opinion, and although we are not acting conjointly, every one of us is spreading this Krishna consciousness movement to his own capacity and producing many disciples to spread it all over the world. As far as we are concerned, we have already started the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, and many thousands of Europeans and Americans have joined this movement. Indeed, it is spreading like wildfire. The cult of Krishna consciousness, based on the 9 principles of devotional service, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atmanivedanam, SB 7523, Srimad Bhagavatam 7523, will never be stopped. It will go on without distinction of caste, creed, color, or country. No one can check it. So Prabhupada in the purport recognized that his God brothers were making disciples. That means he recognized them as bona fide. And that's an arrow in the heart of a bogus concoction called the Ritvik system of initiation. A bogus concoction, because Prabhupada 1600 plus times used the words disciplic succession. Succession means somebody succeeds. And, we don't hate the Ritvikists. We don't hate them. They're devotees, but they haven't understood what Prabhupada taught. You point this out, they just can't make a head or tail of it. But it's very clear, straightforward. My God brothers, we're all pushing on this movement. So Prabhupada recognized one group of God brothers, even if they were envious. But the other group, he never went there. He never went there. Now, I went there to see that the Bagh Bazar Gaudiya Mat. The Gaudiya Mats were split by out-of-court settlement between Bhaktivilas Tirtha and the other side. And the Bhaktivilas Tirtha side was the side where Prabhupada dealt. He wrote a letter to Bhaktivilas Tirtha that, please help me go to the West. And Bhaktivilas Tirtha wrote back, first you join our institution and we'll decide whether to send you to the West. But at least he was in touch with him. And then he told Jayapataka Maharaj that time in Hyderabad that he went back home, back to Godhead. And Bhakti Vaibhav Puri Maharaj told me that Tirtha Maharaj printed books, and Madhav Maharaj, who also Prabhupada dealt with, built temples. He said, but Swami Maharaj, Prabhupada did both. And obviously much more, than these God brothers. But Prabhupada recognized those God brothers.
That's a beautiful.
He didn't reject them. He didn't reject them.
That's a beautiful point, how Srila Prabhupada respected his God brothers, although cooperation was maybe not possible.
Right. That's what he says in this purport. Now you're talking about reading Prabhupada's books and his purports. It's right there. We were not working conjointly, but we're all spreading this Krishna consciousness movement.
And your message is also that if you are convinced that when we associate with Prabhupada through his books, we actually get that pure Siddhanta and knowledge. So and that's why it's so important also to be in touch with Prabhupada's books. Yeah, that's beautiful. Wonderful. Maybe towards the end, any final words you would like to share with us? I mean, sometimes we also speak about application, how to make sure that we can apply what we read in Prabhupada's books, or any other final words you like to share with us before we come to an end?
Be aware of attempts to interpret Prabhupada's purports and change their meanings. I don't think that I personally don't have a gripe about the editing of, the BBT editors. They haven't changed the purports. Something else is going on besides that, where there's rationalizations that what Prabhupada wrote is not actually what he taught. And that's extremely dangerous. So in closing, I would beware of that. And ISKCON India is doing its part by constituting a board of scholars called the ISKCON India Scholars Board. They have a website, and they're going to be publishing essays and, deeply studying and presenting the Siddhanta from Shastras. In the purport of Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Leela 20, chapter 20, Madhya Leela, text 352, Prabhupada talks about understanding an incarnation. It has to be understood from Shastras. Anyone can claim to be an incarnation. So Prabhupada writes in the purport that a spiritual master has to speak according to Shastras. And if a spiritual master doesn't speak according to Shastras, he's not a spiritual master. If a saintly person, a sadhu, doesn't speak according to Shastras, he's not a saintly person. And then Prabhupada wrote, Shastra is the center of all. So that's books are the basis. So yeah, you can't change what's in Shastras. And as I quoted earlier, the Bhagavatam 3:24-40, sanction in Vedic literature. For any action, there's supposed to be a sanction in Vedic literature. The Varnashram is Vedic system. Krishna says, I created it in the Gita. Prabhupada quotes that again and again. Chatur Varnam Maya Shrishna. So yeah, if you say, no, we don't want Varnashram system, then you're not following Prabhupada. You're following your mind. But you may not be perfectly following Varnashram. That's a different thing. But to say that we don't believe in it, we don't want it, it's a repudiation of what Prabhupada taught. It's very sad that any devotee could say that. And the funny thing is, they won't up and say, we don't agree with Prabhupada. No, they'll say, we're the real followers of Prabhupada.
I thank you for that last point you mentioned about Sadhguru Shastra, and that
Right.
emphasis on Shastra, because whatever the sadhu speaks, whatever guru speaks, they can't speak independently from what is there in Shastra.
It's right in Prabhupada's purport.
That's like an eternal principle. And in that sense, books are the basis. And Srila Prabhupada very mercifully gave us such a great treasure of literature. And we just have to study and be in touch with Prabhupada's teachings. So thank you so much for sharing your realizations on this topic and emphasizing the importance of studying Prabhupada's books, understanding what Prabhupada really wanted from us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.